In this video, you'll learn why perhaps it's time to start thinking about making data-driven decisions and simply just make decisions. Let's jump right in. Hi there, my name is Ruben Garta and I'm an expert in data and decisions. Though, because of my background, data tends to be focused quite a bit. And of course, I have a lot of people who I work with who come to me and they want to know how to use data to make better decisions, to make data-driven decisions. And sometimes that's not possible. And that can be really hard to accept. We fundamentally move and believe in the usage of data, of evidence, to make decisions. When we tend to think about this or think about common issues, common questions, even bigger ones like happiness and health and what should we do about the pandemic, you'll hear a lot of pushes for let's choose whatever the evidence supports. But what happens when we don't have evidence? That's what we'll talk about today. The increased availability of data has made it seem like there's always data, there's always evidence, so it's just simply a matter of reading the evidence. And that's not true. I think in some cases, you end up really almost looking at tea leaves. You're looking at the leaves to try to predict the future, and you're treating the leaves like it's hard data, like it's hard evidence, like it tells you everything you need to know, but you're really taking a guess. And we can see this in examples all over the place. Just today, New Zealand, for example, which has historically done well with the pandemic, announced they're going to have color-coded restrictions or regions. But color-coded restrictions, this is something that countries were doing last year. And what happened in New Zealand is they really went hard on this strategy of trying to eradicate COVID. 0 cases of COVID was the goal. Now, we're starting to realize that that's not really possible. You effectively have to live with the disease in the same way we do with the flu and other diseases. You're always going to have COVID cases. You're going to have people in the hospital, but you manage it. And of course, you can push vaccination and other things, but you learn to live with it. And New Zealand is really coming around to this idea, though it's a bit hard after spending 2 years saying we're going to have no cases, we're going to lock the island, we're going to do nothing. So they have the evidence, they have the data, and yet their decisions don't seem to always make sense. While they may have worked over the past 6 months, 2 years, what about the next 5 years? Are you simply just going to keep people on lockdown whenever there's a handful of cases? So you have to move on from it, right? You have to perhaps look at the evidence or look at the lack of evidence about what's going to happen in the future and then still make a decision. So the data may actually be making things worse in some situations like what we're seeing there. We also see this in sports, for example, right? Moneyball, the book by Michael Lewis, and then of course the movie was incredibly popular about the usage of data to build baseball teams. The idea then spread to all sports teams. Basketball, which I have talked about a lot in videos and podcasts and writing, it's undertaken it, and a team like the Houston Rockets really went all in on Moneyball. And the Houston Rockets were a good team. They made the playoffs. They were competitive. They did not win the championship, but they did well. But other teams, of course, did just as well with less focus on data. So the data itself is not the end-all and be-all. It's really about making better decisions. And if you have frameworks and processes and ways of making these decisions with and without data, you'll be much more better suited. So really, what you want to focus on are really 3 things: speed, boldness, flexibility. So speed is how quickly you can make a decision. Do you have to wait weeks, months, days to collect data, even if the data is not going to be accurate? Or can you actually make a decision, tweak, move on, make a decision, tweak, move on, and you get better at tweaking, less so at waiting for everything to be full in, for all the ducks to be in the row, so to speak. Next is boldness. This really comes down to what's your level of comfort with failure. You might release something company-wide, personally, and it might just completely fail. Is that okay? Can you move on from it? Can you accept it? Can your team accept it? Is there a culture for it? Now, granted, if you run in a public health agency, how you think about failure is going to have different connotations than a company that simply works in any other industry. But even then, you can look at how restrictions are working. You can look at what seems to be playing out. What are people doing? Are they responding to mandates? And then tweaking and accepting that, we got this wrong, but now we're doing this. And then lastly, flexibility. And flexibility is your ability to take the outcome that you want, but be really flexible at the way you get there. I sometimes have companies that come to me and they say, this is the outcome we want, we agree, but this is how we want to get there. We want this specific 2, 3, 4 steps. We want specific specific technology. We already selected it, just help us implement it. We know that this is going to be perfect. We're going to hire this role. We're going to train people in this specific way. And that may be correct or it may not be correct. You may realize as you implement a software tool that is incorrect for your company, or you may discover that it's hard to actually hire this specific role, or that your culture doesn't support this. So are you flexible enough to change your approach and then move on? Or are you really dogmatic about how you get there to the actual outcome? And I'll finish with one more story. The fires in California, of course, are always an issue in the summer, and they're progressively getting worse with elements of climate change and a few other things. And the usage of machine learning has actually been helpful in dealing with some of the fires. There was an example where the computer models were saying, you know what, the fire is not going to cross this ridge. The computer model has a high certainty, a high probability that this is the case. And what do you know? The fire crossed the ridge. So no one told the fire that the machine learning model said it was not possible. But this happens, right? We live in a complex world. We have complex variables. We do not fully understand everything. So data has a role. We can use it. We can make decisions with it. But we also got to be comfortable and make decisions without it. And sometimes, perhaps it's a matter of walking out to that ridge and then seeing, you know what, it's possible this fire crosses the ridge. What can we do if that happens? Let's deal with that. Instead of saying the model says there's a high certainty this will not happen, so I trust the model, I trust the data. And that's all I have for today. As always, make sure to subscribe, like, share, whatever else you can do in YouTube. In the description box below, there's going to be a few links that I think you'll find helpful. First, it's going to be a link to my book, The Data Mirage. The book is out wherever you can buy books. Some of these ideas are covered in the book, so you can go deeper there. Second, there's going to be a link to my Twitter where I share similar ideas in a bite-sized format. And third, there's going to be a link to my newsletter, The Growth Needle, where I share, again, the same ideas, but in a written format on a weekly basis. And there's a few things that only goes out to those newsletter subscribers. So you can find all those links in the description box. And finally, in the comments section below, let me know what you think. Does data always have a role in making decisions? Or is there something else that can be used when there is no data? Until next time, talk soon.